Welcome back to the deep dive. You've handed us, well, an incredible stack of complex sources today. It's a really comprehensive brief.
It certainly is.
Covering everything from, microdata on these skyrocketing housing costs all the way to the highest stakes constitutional legal debates happening in the Supreme Court right now.
A huge range.
So our mission today, pure surgical extraction. We're going to dive deep into every critical fact, every data point, and importantly, the interconnected insights. The goal is for you, the learner, to assimilate this complex body of knowledge thoroughly and rapidly.
In this material, it really demands forensic attention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We aren't just summarizing here. We need to analyze the implications of these facts across, different pillars of governance.
Yeah.
And I think the most compelling place to start, the real hook, is with a fundamental constitutional distinction. It really underpins so much of modern democracy.
Absolutely. Let's start right there. That phenomenal legal hook, the difference between the statutory right to vote and the constitutional freedom of voting. Seems subtle, maybe.
It does seem subtle, like mere semantics. But the legal implications are, frankly, immense. It's actually the foundation of the center's argument that's currently before the Supreme Court. They're drawing a very specific line here, one that defines the state's regulatory power.
Oh, so?
Well, the center's affidavit, it clearly states that the right to vote itself, the basic entitlement, is a statutory right. It's conferred by Section 62 of the Representation of the People Act, 1951.
Okay, so it's granted by law, by statute.
Precisely. And because it's statutory, the thinking goes, the legislature can impose limitations on it. It's not absolute.
So the state gives you the mechanism, the permission slip, basically, to vote. But what about the actual act of voting? Walking into the booth, making a choice. Where does that sit in this hierarchy of rights?
That's where the freedom of voting comes in. That's the second piece. The center posits that this freedom, the act itself, is a species, a part of the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, guaranteed under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. It's that moment of self-expression, of making your preference known.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that legal philosophy a bit. When I go into the booth, I'm expressing my choice, or maybe my lack of choice if I use NOTA. That specific action is the point where the statutory right kind of transforms, or maybe activates, into a fundamental freedom. Is that it?
That's exactly the argument. They cited the 2003 Supreme Court judgment in PCL versus Union to back this up.
Right, I remember that case.
That ruling clarified that while your initial eligibility to vote, being the right age, citizen, resident, isn't itself a fundamental right, it's subject to those statutory rules. But the act of casting the vote, whether it's for candidate A, B, or even expressing dissatisfaction via NOTA, that is the accomplishment, the exercise of the voter's freedom of expression and preference.
Okay, but here's where the conflict comes in, isn't it? If the freedom to express a choice is fundamental, how can the state's election law then restrict that choice? Specifically, thinking about the NOTA option in uncontested elections.
Exactly. The conflict is Section 532 of the Representation of the People Act, 1951. This is what's being challenged by petitioners like the Vitti Center for Legal Policy and the Association for Democratic Reforms, ADR.
And what does Section 532 actually say?
It dictates that if the number of candidates standing for election is equal to the number of seats available, the returning officer must immediately declare those candidates elected. No poll is taken.
Which means, in practice, citizens in that constituency are completely prevented from using the none-of-the-above option. NOTA simply isn't available.
Correct. They lose that ability to express dissatisfaction with the candidates on offer.
A fundamental expression is blocked by a procedural rule.
That's the core of the challenge. And the center's counter-argument is, well, it's deeply nuanced.
Yeah.
It draws directly from that statutory versus fundamental distinction we just discussed.
How?
They argue that the freedom of voting is an incidence of a poll, meaning it only happens if a poll takes place.
I see.
So if the statute, Section 532, declares that no poll is necessary because the election is uncontested, then that incidence, the moment of free expression inherent in casting a ballot, simply does not arise for the electorate in that specific situation.
Wow. So the fundamental freedom is contingent on a statutory procedure actually being triggered.
That's the argument. This legal chess game, over the very existence of a poll is really the heart of this debate over voter autonomy versus state regulation.
That distinction, whether a freedom hinges on a procedural step like a poll being scheduled, it sets a really powerful precedent. It affects how we analyze everything else today, right?
Absolutely.
So we're going to group the massive amount of source material you provided into 4 critical pillars. First, electoral integrity and law, which we've just started. Second, economic and policy megatrends. Third, security and justice. And finally, pillar 4, critical social legislation.
A broad canvas.
Definitely. So let's jump right back into pillar 1, starting with some raw electoral data that just came in. We've got some concrete data points from the first phase of the Bihar Assembly polls. And they tell, well, an interesting story about Democratic participation. What are the core facts on turnout?
The headline fact is the turnout figure itself. A record 64.66% of eligible voters cast their ballots in that first phase.
64.66%. That sounds high.
It is significant. It clearly surpasses the 62.57% recorded way back in the 2000 Assembly election, which had kind of stood as the benchmark for a long time.
So this really represents a remarkable level of maybe enthusiasm or something else, faith in the process, perhaps.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? The official commentary certainly framed it as enthusiasm. Chief Election Commissioner INS Ikshak lauded it as a historic turnout, the highest since 1951.
Since 1951.
Wow.
Yeah.
He emphasized the success of the Election Commission's efforts, specifically mentioning, "Sir, with 0 appeals and highest voter turnout since 1951. He credited the transparent work of the election machinery.
But, of course, high turnout is always politically ambiguous. It leads to completely conflicting claims, right?
Always. And we've seen exactly that. On one side, you have the NDA's interpretation. Senior BJP leader and Bihar Deputy CM, Samrat Chaudhary, projected an overwhelming victory. He claimed reports indicated they were set to win around 100 of the 121 seats contested in that first phase.
100 out of 121. That's very confident.
Extremely confident. He even suggested this turnout might break their 2010 election record and boldly predicted the defeat of the Mahagathbandhan's chief ministerial candidate, Tejashwi Yadav, from his Raghupur seat.
Okay, so that's the ruling coalition's take. But the opposition naturally sees this high turnout completely differently, as evidence of deep public anger, maybe?
Precisely. Tejashwi Yadav himself and Congress leader Pawan Khera, they interpret the turnout as an unprecedented wave of change.
A wave of change.
Yadav explicitly stated that Bihar voted to dispel 20 years of darkness. He framed the vote as reflecting voter anger against, the usual issues: unemployment, poverty, crime, corruption, suggesting the high numbers are actually a mandate for political transition, not continuity.
So 2 totally opposite readings of the same number. And right in the middle of these claims, there's a serious controversy that brings us right back to the integrity of the process itself. The AAP's claim of voter fraud.
Yes, this allegation directly undermines the confidence the EC has been trying so hard to build.
What's the specific claim?
AAP Delhi chief Sarda Padavaj accused several senior BJP leaders, he named names: MP Rakesh Sinha, Provincial Morcha chief Santosh Osha, and party leader Najendra Kumar of double voting.
Double voting, meaning?
Meaning voting in both the Delhi and the Bihar Assembly polls, which of course is illegal.
And this allegation is critical because the Election Commission had given pretty strong assurances beforehand, hadn't they?
They had. The EC explicitly stated that following their rigorous Special Summary Revision, or SIR-R, process designed to clean up the rolls, no individual registered in one state should have been able to vote in Bihar. They confirmed the purity of the rolls.
So the AAP's allegation, whether it holds up or not, immediately throws doubt on how effective that SIR-R process actually was.
It does. It raises immediate concerns about potential systemic loopholes in electoral roll management, which is just foundational for fair elections.
Okay, before we dig deeper into that whole electoral roll purity issue, which we will, we need to address the legal mechanisms that can exclude candidates before voters even get a chance to see their names on the ballot. I'm talking about the nomination process itself.
Yes, this is crucial. It often happens away from the public eye, but it's incredibly important.
Our sources highlight that one of the, well, potentially undemocratic aspects of the whole election happens right at the start. It's about the vast and apparently unreviewable discretion given to the returning officer, the RO.
That's under Section 36 of the RP Act, 1951. And the power granted here is, frankly, immense and quite alarming to reformers.
What exactly can the RO do?
The RO is given the unilateral authority to reject nominations based on what the law calls defects of a substantial character. And this decision is made following only a summary inquiry.
A summary inquiry. Sounds brief.
It can be. And crucially, the sources emphasize the unreviewable nature of this power before the poll takes place. Once the RO rejects a nomination, that's basically it until after the election.
But why is it unreviewable at that stage? What stops the court from stepping in if there's an obvious mistake or, potential abuse of power?
That goes back to the constitutional architecture of elections in India, specifically Article 329B.
Okay.
This article generally bars judicial interference with electoral matters once the election process has officially commenced and until it's fully completed. The idea, the framers' intent, was that judicial non-interference was necessary to ensure elections conclude swiftly, predictably, and on time.
So avoid getting bogged down in legal challenges mid-election.
Exactly. But the consequence is that the only remedy available for someone whose nomination is perhaps unjustly rejected is an election petition. And that can only be filed after the polls are over and the results are declared.
Which makes the initial damage, the candidate being excluded from the race, totally irreversible for that election cycle.
Completely irreversible. The system effectively protects the sanctity of the electoral calendar over, arguably, the immediate fairness of the candidate pool in that specific moment.
But the real paradox, the really frustrating part, according to our sources, is created by how the law interprets technical errors versus outright dishonesty.
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe maddening for democratic reformers. There was a Supreme Court ruling, Resurgence India versus Election Commission. And this ruling created a very strange incentive structure. It states that candidates who provide false declarations in their affidavits, say, lying about assets or criminal cases, can be prosecuted after the election. But crucially, the falsehood itself does not automatically invalidate their nomination. They stay on the ballot.
They stay on the ballot even if they lie.
Yes, but, and here's the twist, if a declaration is merely incomplete, maybe a column left blank, perhaps due to a simple clerical error made in good faith, that mistake can be deemed a substantial defect and invalidate the nomination.
Wait, that's staggering. So the system structurally punishes a slip-up, a technical oversight, potentially more harshly than it punishes deliberate dishonesty. A liar might stay on the ballot, but someone who made an honest mistake filling out a form gets kicked out.
That's precisely the paradox highlighted. It creates a situation where meticulous technical compliance, ticking every single box correctly, is prioritized over substantive truthfulness.
That seems deeply flawed.
It leads to what the sources call the common procedural traps. These specific administrative barriers that can be, and perhaps sometimes are, used to eliminate candidates, especially those without strong party backing or legal resources.
Okay, let's list those specific traps. Our sources identify 3 main areas where candidates often fall foul of these technicalities.
Right. First, there's the oath trap. Every candidate has to take an oath or make an affirmation, but it has to be done before a specified authority, after filing the nomination papers, but before the official scrutiny begins.
A very specific window.
Extremely specific. If the candidate takes the oath too early or too late or accidentally does it before the wrong official, boom, nomination rejected. It's purely about timing and the correct authority, not the substance of the oath itself.
Okay, trap number 1, what's the second?
The second is the notarization trap. This relates to that mandatory affidavit, Form 26. The one detailing assets, liabilities, educational qualifications, criminal cases, all of that.
Yes, the disclosure form.
That form has to be properly notarized. Failure to get it notarized correctly, or submitting it in a way that doesn't exactly match the prescribed format, can be grounds for rejection. And given how complex Form 26 is, errors are apparently quite common.
Understandable. And the third trap. This one sounds particularly prone to manipulation. The certificate trap.
Absolutely. This one seems ripe for creating administrative choke points. Candidates are required to submit various no-dues certificates. These might be for municipal corporations, electricity boards, water authorities. Sometimes clearance certificates from the Election Commission itself are needed.
So they need sign-offs from multiple government bodies.
Exactly. And each requirement turns that administrative agency into a potential strategic bottleneck. If an official, for whatever reason, decides to delay issuing a necessary certificate, or if there's just a genuine administrative backlog, the candidate might miss the RO's scrutiny deadline.
And their candidacy can be eliminated through no real fault of their own just because of bureaucratic delay.
Precisely. All before the RO even looks at the substance of their nomination. It's filtration by administrative hurdle.
So If the current Indian system is, as the sources suggest, fundamentally designed for this kind of filtration, how do other countries approach this? What are the global best practices advocating for facilitation instead?
The contrast is quite stark. It really highlights how India's process deviates from what many see as true facilitation of participation.
For example.
Okay, take the UK. There, returning officers are actually empowered, even encouraged, to help candidates fix minor errors before the deadline. The priority is getting eligible candidates onto the ballot, not finding reasons to exclude them.
Helping them fix mistakes. That's different.
Very different. Canada goes even further. They mandate a guaranteed 48-hour correction period specifically for technical deficiencies found in nomination papers.
A 48-hour window.
Okay. In Germany, the election authorities are required to issue a formal written notice detailing any problems they find, and they have to provide time for the candidate to remedy those issues.
Written notice, time to fix it.
And Australia actively encourages candidates to submit their nomination papers early. Specifically, so there's a review period built in where corrections can be identified and made before the final deadline.
So the focus elsewhere seems to be on enabling participation, whereas here it can feel like an obstacle course.
That's the critique. So what are the concrete solutions being proposed for India to shift away from this filtration mindset towards facilitation?
What's on the table?
Well, first and foremost, the argument is that the RO's broad discretion needs to be curtailed. It should be replaced with a clear duty. The RO should be mandated to issue a detailed written notice specifying the exact nature of any perceived error. No more vague substantial defect rulings.
Okay, clarity.
Second, there needs to be a guaranteed window, like in Canada, say, 48 hours specifically to fix purely technical errors. This needs to be clearly distinguished from substantive disqualifications like not meeting age requirements or having a prohibitive criminal conviction.
A grace period for fixable mistakes.
Exactly. And third, a major structural reform, implementing a public, digital by default nomination system.
How would that help?
Well, a digital system could automatically validate many details against the electoral roll in real time. It could provide a public dashboard showing the status of each nomination with timestamps for submissions, queries, and decisions, along with the reasons for any rejection.
Transparency.
Massive transparency, yeah. It would significantly reduce the scope for these opaque, behind-the-scenes administrative eliminations and make the whole process much more accountable.
That kind of structural reform, yeah, that would fundamentally change the initial gateway to democracy, wouldn't it? Speaking of digital systems, the sheer scale of India's move towards digital governance is really evident in the preparations for the first fully digital census planned for 2027. This isn't just, an upgrade. It feels like a massive technological leap for what's already the world's largest data collection exercise.
It truly is a foundational step for governance, planning, everything. The Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India recently launched 2 specialized mobile applications just for the trial phase of this digital census.
Okay, what are they called?
One is the Digital Layout Map, or DLM app. The other is the Census 2027 House List app.
And who gets to use these? Just anyone?
Oh no, definitely not. These applications are designed specifically for authorized personnel only. We're talking about the hundreds of thousands of enumerators who will be doing the field work.
So the usual census takers, teachers, local officials?
Typically, yes. Trained government school teachers, revenue officials, block development officers, that kind of personnel. The apps are compatible with both Android and Apple phones, but access is strictly controlled. Data integrity and security are obviously paramount.
Makes sense. Tell us about the pre-test that's happening now. What's the timeline, and what data are they focusing on collecting in this trial phase?
Right. The pre-test for the first phase, which is technically called the House Listing and Housing Operations, or HLO phase, is actually underway right now. It's scheduled from November 10th to 30th, but only in select designated areas across the country.
And what are they asking?
In this HLO phase, the enumerators are using a questionnaire that covers 30 essential questions. These are primarily focused on housing characteristics, the type of structure, amenities available like water, electricity, sanitation, and also household assets.
Sure.
It's about mapping the physical landscape first.
Okay, let's focus on that digital layout map, the DLM app. You said it replaces the old paper sketches. What does it achieve that the old physical process, the notional sketch, couldn't?
The DLM introduces critical spatial data that was previously impossible, or at least incredibly difficult and inconsistent, to collect systematically at scale. It does replicate the traditional paper-based sketches of areas, but it adds layers of digital efficiency and precision.
Like what kind of precision?
Like recording the precise geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude, for every single structure, every building, every house.
Wow, lat long for every house in India eventually.
That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
It also records standardized data on locality names, road names, building numbers, and, crucially, it categorizes the building type, systematically distinguishing between pucca, meaning permanent, durable structures, and kucha, or temporary structures.
Capturing the latitude and longitude of every single dwelling, that's enormous, especially for urban planning, resource allocation.
It's a game changer for planning. This foundational geospatial data allows planners to overlay census demographic information with other critical infrastructure data. Where are the water pipes laid? Where are the power lines? Where is infrastructure deficient? Where are schools or hospitals most needed? It moves policymaking from relying on broad averages for large areas down to microgeographic precision.
Planning based on actual locations, not just estimates.
Exactly. And it's not just the government collecting data. There's also an element of public participation being tested right now through self-enumeration.
Self-enumeration, how does that work?
Yes, to encourage public engagement and also, importantly, to test the digital pipeline from the citizens' end, a self-enumeration facility has been made available. It's via the census portal. The test version is at https://test.census.gov.ins. This was open from November 1st to 7th.
And who could use it?
Only individuals residing in those specific pre-test areas. It allowed them to log in and submit their own household details online. This helps the census office identify glitches, refine the user interface, and generally prepare the system before the official nationwide field enumeration begins for real.
Okay, fascinating stuff on the census tech. Now let's transition from that to the major controversy brewing around the electoral rolls specifically, the Special Intensive Revision or SIRR process. We started the show mentioning that AP allegation of double voting in Bihar.
Right.
And now we need to address the opposition's much broader charge that the ECI, the Election Commission, is effectively conducting a backdoor NRC through this SAR process.
This is a hugely charged political and legal debate. And it's particularly explosive when it comes to Assam, given its unique history with the National Register of Citizens. The Election Commission of India has had to tread very, very carefully here.
What's the ECI's official stance, especially regarding Assam?
Well, the Chief Election Commissioner explicitly clarified that the second phase of this nationwide SARA process would skip Assam entirely.
Skip it. Why?
His stated reason was that Assam's own citizenship ascertainment process, which was conducted under Supreme Court monitoring, is, in his words, about to be completed. So the ECI is stepping back from Assam in this specific revision phase.
But critics argue that even excluding Assam doesn't really address the fundamental jurisdictional question, does it? Should the ECI be involved in determining citizenship at all anywhere in the country as part of cleaning up voter lists?
That is the core of the criticism. The ECI's constitutional mandate and its powers under the Representation of the People Act are about managing elections and ensuring accurate voter lists based on eligibility, which includes citizenship. But its jurisdiction isn't explicitly about determining citizenship status itself.
That's a separate legal process under the Citizenship Act.
Exactly. Critics argue that citizenship ascertainment must be left strictly to the competent authorities designated under the Citizenship Act, like the foreigners' tribunals or other relevant bodies, especially after the NRC exercise. The political sensitivity in Assam, of course, is rooted in that colossal and deeply controversial NRC exercise.
It's probably worth laying out the full factual background of the NRC Assam exercise for listeners, because its shadow really dictates the political climate there.
Absolutely. The final NRC list for Assam was published back on August 31st, 2019. This followed years of complex procedures, all monitored directly by the Supreme Court. The scale was unprecedented.
What were the numbers?
About 3.30 crore people applied for inclusion for roughly 68.38 lakh applications. The final result, which was highly scrutinized and contested, found 311,021,004 people eligible for inclusion in the NRC.
Which means
19,006,657 individuals were excluded from the final list, nearly 2 million people. And the entire massive operation cost the state and central governments over 1,600 crore, a monumental undertaking.
And compounding this already complex situation is the Supreme Court's very recent decision regarding a specific part of the Citizenship Act relevant only to Assam Section 6A.
That's right. In October 2024, just recently, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of Section 6A of the Citizenship Act 1955.
And what does Section 6A do?
Section 6A provides a unique legal framework for determining citizenship specifically in Assam. It deals with people who entered the state from Bangladesh during a specific period between January 1966 and March 25, 1971. The Supreme Court's ruling essentially reinforced Assam's distinct legal status regarding citizenship determination for that historical cohort.
So the ECI deciding to skip Assam for this SIR phase avoids running headlong into a massive political and legal minefield.
You could say that. If the ECI were to conduct a full-fledged SAR in Assam right now, potentially involving inquiries that touch on citizenship, it could risk contradicting the results of the NRC process or challenging the unique legal mechanisms just upheld by the Supreme Court under Section 6A.
It would create huge uncertainty for the millions included in the NRC.
Exactly. It could effectively reopen 5 years of settled, albeit contested, data to renewed challenge through a different administrative process. Politically and legally, it's fraught with peril.
Okay. Now let's see how voter enrollment issues are playing out elsewhere. There was an interesting observation from the Bombay High Court regarding the practical limits of how often people can enroll.
Yes, the Bombay High Court, while hearing a specific petition about cutoff dates for voter enrollment, actually reinforced that distinction. We started the whole show with the difference between the freedom to vote and the right to vote.
But their observation was more practical, wasn't it? About administrative capacity.
It was purely pragmatic. They were focused on the Election Commission's ability to handle the workload.
What was the court's specific concern about opening the floodgates?
The bench noted that if the electoral laws were interpreted to require the Election Commission to process enrollment applications immediately and continuously the moment any person turns 18, it would simply open the floodgates.
Too many applications all at once.
Exactly. It would create an administratively overwhelming situation for the EC authorities who have to verify documents, conduct checks, and then formally include names in the rolls. So their conclusion was that the statutory right to vote effectively materializes only when the voters list is systematically revised according to the established schedule.
But they did offer a remedy for the petitioner.
Yes. Importantly, the court directed the State Election Commission to process the specific petitioner's application within 6 weeks, ensuring her right wasn't indefinitely delayed. So, a pragmatic observation on process, but also upholding the individual's right in that instance.
Meanwhile, the RAS controversy is intensely political over in West Bengal. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has taken a very public stand on the enumeration forms, hasn't she?
She certainly has. It's become a major political flashpoint there. She publicly refuted media reports that claim she had personally received her enumeration form from a booth-level officer or BLO.
And what did she say she would do?
She stated emphatically that she would refuse to fill out her own form for this ongoing SAR process until, in her words, each and every one from Bengal completes the exercise first.
So, a public act of solidarity, but also a challenge to the ECI's process.
Absolutely. It's framed as solidarity, demanding universal coverage before she participates. But it clearly complicates the ECI's efforts to complete the revision smoothly. As of the latest figures reported, about 1.73 crore SIR forms had already been distributed in West Bengal.
And predictably, the leader of the opposition there, Sivendu Adhikari, is hitting back with counter-allegations against the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, the KMC.
Yes, Adhikari is alleging specific malpractice by the KMC. He claims the corporation is engaging in what he called illegal, immoral, and unethical mass distribution of birth certificates.
Mass distribution of birth certificates? For what purpose?
The alleged purpose, according to Adhikari, is to accommodate suspicious individuals, presumably referring to people whose citizenship might be questioned, who might otherwise be at risk of being removed from the voter list during this SIR exercise.
So the claim is essentially political engineering, using potentially forged or improperly issued documents to pad the voter rolls.
That's the essence of the allegation, that it's an attempt to manipulate the demographic composition of the electoral rolls ahead of the SIR cleanup. This accusation, true or not, ties directly back to those core questions of electoral roll purity and the potential for administrative systems to be misused for political ends.
Okay, let's pivot quite sharply now. Moving from the sort of nuts and bolts of electoral governance to the really big macro policy frameworks that are shaping India's future. And we have to start with the increasingly urgent discussion around universal basic income, or UBI?
Yes, the conversation around UBI has definitely shifted. It's moved from being perhaps a philosophical ideal or a niche academic concept to being discussed as an urgent policy necessity.
What's driving that urgency?
Two major converging economic shifts, primarily. First, the growing precarity and insecurity of the gig economy, where traditional safety nets don't apply. And second, the looming and potentially massive threat of technological unemployment due to automation and AI.
Right, the automation threat. There are some stark predictions.
Yeah. There are. The McKinsey Global Institute, for instance, estimated a few years ago that potentially up to 800 million jobs globally could be displaced by automation by 2030. That's a staggering number.
800 million.
So UBI is now being seriously considered as perhaps the critical mechanism needed to cushion this potential mass displacement, to stabilize consumer demand in the economy, and maybe, fundamentally, to provide a necessary reset for the social contract between citizens and the state in an era of automation.
And the structural argument for UBI in the Indian context is reinforced by the stark realities of economic inequality, isn't it? Which often seem masked by high headline GDP growth rates.
This is a crucial point, and the data is quite revealing. Earlier this year, the government, through the Press Information Bureau, PIB, put out a claim that India ranks fourth globally in income equality.
Fourth. That sounds very high, very equal.
It does, but that claim was based on a consumption-based Gini index. And measuring inequality based on household expenditure tends to show less volatility and less extreme inequality compared to measuring the distribution of actual wealth.
Okay, so consumption smoothing makes it look better. What does the wealth data show?
When you look at wealth concentration, the picture's terrifyingly different. According to the World Inequality Database, India's wealth inequality Gini coefficient stood at a staggering 75 in 2023.
75. What does that mean in real terms?
In real terms, it means the top 1% of the population owns 40% of the entire nation's wealth.
40% for the top 1%.
And the top 10% controls nearly 77% of the national wealth. Some experts have noted these are levels of wealth concentration not seen since the peak of the colonial era. It signals a deep, deep structural imbalance in the economy.
And this imbalance, this concentration of wealth, surely creates that political and social disconnect we see reflected in things like the global happiness reports.
It seems highly likely. You see India reporting impressive GDP growth, 8.4% in 2023-24, for example. But then, in the 2023 World Happiness Report, India ranked way down at 126th out of 137 countries.
Behind neighbors like Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
Yes. The data strongly suggest that this high-speed aggregate economic growth is just not translating into broad-based improvements in welfare or citizen satisfaction for the majority. And this disconnect really strengthens the policy imperative for something like a guaranteed income floor, a UBI.
But the big question always comes back. Does UBI actually work? Have the pilot studies, particularly the one in India, provided concrete evidence? And crucially, does it disincentivize work? That's the classic criticism.
That's always the main concern raised.
Yeah.
But the evidence from pilot studies is actually quite compelling. The SCEA-led UBI pilot initiative in Madhya Pradesh, which ran between 2011 and 2013, showed profoundly positive outcomes.
Such as?
Recipients experienced measurable improvements in nutrition, especially for children, increased school attendance and better educational outcomes for kids, improved overall health, including mental health indicators.
Okay, positive social outcomes. But what about the work question?
Critically, that study, along with major international trials in places like Finland, Kenya, even Iran, which has a national cash transfer program, they uniformly confirmed that recipients did not significantly reduce their willingness to work or their labor supply.
So the fear of people just stopping work seems unfounded in these trials.
Largely unfounded, yes. In many cases, recipients actually use the basic income as seed capital to invest in small businesses, buy tools or equipment, or gain new skills, which actually increase their productive capacity and earning potential in the longer run.
Okay, so if the structural arguments are strong, the social outcomes seem positive, and the work disincentive fear isn't strongly supported by evidence, then the perennial concern must be the cost. Can we afford it? What's the estimated price tag for a minimal UBI in India?
Cost is definitely the biggest hurdle. The estimates vary, of course, depending on the level of the UBI payment, but a commonly discussed figure is for a minimal UBI, defined as an amount roughly equivalent to the national poverty line. That was calculated to be around $7,620 per person per year.
$7,620 per person per year. What does that translate to as a percentage of GDP?
Implementing even that minimal UBI, universally would cost approximately 5% of India's GDP.
5% of GDP. That is a substantial commitment.
It's huge. That's the potential price tag for fundamentally tackling historical inequality and trying to future-proof the society against predicted job displacement from automation.
So how would policymakers realistically suggest implementing something this massive without causing, a huge financial shock to the system?
The consensus among proponents generally points towards a phased rollout. Nobody suggests flipping a switch overnight.
Phased how?
Well, policymakers often advocate prioritizing the most vulnerable groups first, perhaps starting with women, the elderly, persons with disabilities. Get the systems working for those groups.
Test the waters.
Test the waters, build capacity. Furthermore, a crucial point is that UBI should initially be designed to complement existing essential welfare schemes, like the Public Distribution System, PDS, for food security, or the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, MGNRGA, for guaranteed workdays, not immediately replace them.
So add UBI on top initially.
Perhaps, or integrate it carefully. This phased and complementary approach allows the system to be tested, refined, and budgeted for incrementally, rather than attempting a disruptive, big bang implementation.
Okay. This focus on sustainable welfare and addressing basic needs connects quite directly to another major global challenge discussed in our sources, the future of food systems, particularly through the lens of the Lancet Commission report.
Yes, the Lancet report is a critical piece of work. It basically sounds an alarm bell regarding the health of the planet and the role our food systems play.
What's the headline finding?
The stark finding is that our global food systems alone are the primary driver for 5 out of the 6 critical planetary boundaries that scientists say humanity has already breached. Things like climate change, biodiversity loss, land system change, freshwater use, and nitrogen-phosphorus flows.
Food systems drive 5 out of 6. That's massive.
It is. And beyond that, food systems are responsible for approximately 30% of total global greenhouse gas emissions.
30%. Can you break that down a bit? Which specific types of foods are driving this huge environmental toll?
Well, the report makes it clear that foods derived from animals, meat, and dairy account for the majority of agricultural emissions. That's often the focus. However, it also highlights that staple grains, simply due to the sheer scale of their production and the intensive inputs required, like fertilizers and water, actually dominate the usage of key resources like nitrogen, phosphorus, and fresh water.
So it's not just about meat. The whole system, including staples, needs reform.
Exactly. The entire food ecosystem, from farm to fork, needs radical transformation, not just one component.
Now, India's current diet, as the report notes, is heavily cereal-based. If India were to try and shift its national diet towards the 2050 benchmarks recommended by Eat Lancet, which means significantly increasing consumption of vegetables, fruits, nuts, and legumes, while moderating cereal intake, what are the immediate economic challenges or trade-offs?
The major immediate trade-off is affordability. This necessary dietary shift towards more diverse, nutrient-dense foods would likely raise average consumer prices, especially for those healthier, non-cereal components like fruits, vegetables, and pulses.
Which hits the poorest hardest.
Precisely. This impacts affordability, particularly in economically vulnerable regions and for households that already spend a large portion of their income on basic food staples. Therefore, the report argues, just focusing on changing diets, a diet-first strategy, simply isn't enough. It could exacerbate inequality.
So if just telling people to eat differently isn't the whole answer, what specific non-dietary policy strategies are being advocated to ensure both sustainability and justice, including affordability, in the food system transformation?
The policy focus has to broaden significantly beyond just consumer choice. The strategies advocated include setting new, much stricter standards to cut the use of harmful agricultural inputs, like certain pesticides and excessive fertilizers, and also reducing water wastage in irrigation.
Regulations on the production side.
Yes. Then, using fiscal measures, things like targeted subsidies or perhaps tax breaks, to make minimally processed, healthy, and sustainable foods cheaper relative to unhealthy, ultra-processed options.
Using taxes and subsidies to shape the market.
Correct. And finally, a really important lever is government procurement. Governments must adapt their own food procurement policies for schools, hospitals, public canteens to normalize and promote regionally familiar, affordable, and sustainable dishes. Use the state's buying power to create demand and drive healthier, more sustainable supply chains.
So tackling supply, demand, and the regulatory environment all at once.
Exactly. The reform has to address the whole system. Things like improving soil health, managing water stress better, reducing reliance on fossil fuels in food processing, transport, and cold chain infrastructure. It's a massive, interconnected challenge.
Okay. Now let's pivot again, staying within macro policy but shifting to the financial sector. There are discussions about significant structural changes there too, with centralization and amalgamation being key themes.
That's right. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman recently confirmed that discussions are actively underway. These involve the government, the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, and major lenders. And the topic is the creation of big and world-class banks.
Big and world-class banks, what's the underlying goal here? Is it just about forcing more mergers like we saw a few years ago?
Amalgamation or mergers is certainly one potential path mentioned, but the stated objective seems broader than just consolidation. The larger goal, as articulated, is to build an entire financial ecosystem and supportive environment where more Indian banks can operate at scale, grow organically, and eventually achieve global standards.
Why the push for bigger banks?
The thinking is that larger banks with stronger balance sheets are needed to support the massive infrastructure financing and corporate lending requirements of a rapidly growing multi-trillion-dollar economy like India's. They need banks capable of underwriting very large projects.
Okay. And within the same financial sector, there was also confirmation regarding a key regulatory safeguard, something designed to prevent excessive private control over banks.
Yes. That relates to the cap on voting rights for large shareholders in domestic banks. The government has indicated that India plans to retain this cap.
Remind us what the cap is.
For private sector banks, even if a single shareholder or entity owns a large stake, say more than 26%, their voting rights are capped at 26%. For government-owned banks, the cap on voting rights for any single shareholder is set even lower, at just 10%.
So ownership can be higher, but influence via voting is limited.
Exactly. The decision to retain this reinforces the regulatory principle that financial stability and maintaining public trust in these vital institutions outweigh the desire for maximum control by large private investors or corporate houses. It's a prudential measure.
Got it. And finally, within the sphere of government finance itself, there's a major internal restructuring happening within the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the CAG, a move towards centralization.
Yes, this is a significant bureaucratic overhaul within the CAG's office. The CAG has approved the creation of 2 new specialized cadres. These will formally take effect on January 1st, 2026.
What are these new cadres called?
They are the Central Revenue Audit, CRA cadre, and the Central Expenditure Audit, CEA cadre.
Revenue and expenditure. What's the functional impact of creating these separate specialized streams?
The primary goal is to enhance efficiency and, critically, build deeper domain expertise within the audit function for central government finances. This consolidation involves bringing together over 4,000 audit professionals. These are individuals currently working within the Indian Audit and Account Service who handle central government receipts and expenditure audits.
Out of how many total staff at CAG?
Out of the CAG's total strength of about 42,000. So it's a significant chunk focusing on central finances. By creating these specialized cadres, the idea is to build deeper, more focused, and perhaps non-transferable domain expertise in the highly complex areas of central revenue systems, like direct and indirect taxes, and central government spending programs. The ultimate aim is to ensure higher quality, more insightful audits of the union government's finances.
All right, switching gears completely now. Let's get into something that's hitting very close to home for many people, especially middle-class citizens: the housing affordability crisis. Our sources paint a picture of a real paradox here. Real wages seem to be stagnating or even falling, while home prices are accelerating at, well, frankly, blistering speeds.
It's a profound economic tension, and the personal anecdote provided in the source material is the perfect illustration of this disconnect. It really brings the numbers to life.
Tell us about Akanksha Agarwal.
Right, Akanksha Agarwal, she's a 32-year-old banker. She's looking to buy a house tracking a specific property she liked in Gurugram Sector 24.
Okay.
Between 2020 and 2024, just 4 years, spanning the pandemic period, the price of that house she wanted absolutely skyrocketed. It went up by 77.8%.
77.8% in 4 years.
Yes, it jumped from 1.8 crore to 3.2 crore.
Wow. And during those same years, what was happening to her income? What was her salary growth like?
Well, her salary increased by roughly 10–12% annually. Which sounds decent, right? That's a standard market rate kind of hike for a professional in her field.
10 to 12% annual raise, yeah, sounds okay on its own.
But compare that to the 77.8% cumulative increase in the price of the asset she wants to buy over just 4 years. You have housing prices growing nearly 8 times faster than standard professional income increases in that specific instance. That is the absolute definition of an affordability crisis. It's rapidly pushing homeownership further and further out of reach, even for well-paid salary professionals.
And the index data, the broader market data, seems to back up this anecdotal evidence on a national scale, doesn't it? Showing a clear shift in market dynamics after the pandemic hit.
Absolutely. The Housing Price Index, or HPI, which was jointly developed by Housing.com and ISB's SR18E Research Institute, provides really crucial data here. They set a base index value of 100 back in January 2017.
Okay, 100 in Jan 2017. What happened pre-pandemic?
In the 3 years before the pandemic really hit, from January 2017 to January 2020, the cumulative growth in this housing price index was relatively modest, 10.6% over 3 years. It was slow, steady, predictable growth.
Right, but the post-pandemic period, that's defined by sharp acceleration.
Dramatically so. In the subsequent period they tracked, from January 2020 to June 2025. So, incorporating the pandemic years and the immediate aftermath, the cumulative growth in the index accelerated massively by 26.2%. This pushed the overall index value up to 139.6.
Just a big jump in the rate of increase.
A huge jump. And within that overall national acceleration, certain specific micromarkets just exploded.
Let's focus on the metro area where the growth was the most staggering, according to the sources.
That would be Delhi NCR. The National Capital Region saw the most astonishing growth figures. Housing prices there grew a massive 122% between January 2020 and June 2025.
122% increase in Delhi NCR in about 5 years.
Yes. And this blistering price growth is happening, remember, at the exact same time that government data reveals simultaneous wage stagnation, or worse. The Periodic Labor Force Survey, the official data, showed that real wages adjusted for inflation, actually fell by 1.7% nationally between the April-June quarter of 2019 and the April-June quarter of 2024.
So prices doubling or more in some areas, while real earning power is actually decreasing slightly. That's the core tension.
That is the absolute core tension. You are earning less, or maybe the same in real terms, but the essential asset you need or want, a home, is becoming exponentially more expensive. It's an unsustainable divergence.
So why? Why are home prices increasing so much faster now than they did pre-2020? One major factor highlighted seems to be a structural shift in demand. People started wanting larger houses.
That's a key driver identified. The pandemic and the widespread shift to work from home or hybrid work cultures fundamentally changed what buyers needed and valued in a home. A standard 2 BHK, 2 bedrooms, which was maybe the norm for many families, is suddenly no longer sufficient.
Why not?
Because people needed dedicated workspace at home. Ideally, a third room, often the size of a bedroom, that could function as a proper study or home office, separate from the living areas.
Right, the need for a home office space.
Exactly. This created a surge in demand specifically for 3 BHK apartments. And the price data reflects this perfectly. Post-pandemic, 3 BHK prices grew by 33.5%, according to the index. That's significantly faster growth than for 2 BHKs, which grew 26.8%, and much faster than 1 BHKs, which only grew 19.3%. The market put a premium on that extra room.
And developers, seeing this demand signal, responded quickly. They changed the supply side of the equation, too.
They did. The SRITNEHousing.com Quantity Index, which tracks new supply coming onto the market, confirms this shift. The supply of new 3 BHK units launched in June 2025 was actually 18% higher than it was back in January 2017.
More 3 BHKs being built.
But conversely, developers significantly reduced the supply of smaller, traditionally more affordable units. The supply of new 2 BHKs fell by 9.9% over the same period, and the supply of 1 BHK units was 11.6% lower.
So the market is actively shifting supply away from entry-level affordability and towards larger, more expensive configurations.
That's what the data indicates. And this leads directly to what the source is called the sales paradox.
The sales paradox, what's that?
It's this. The overall volume of home sales, the total number of units sold, might actually be contracting slightly in some periods. But the total value of those sales is soaring.
How does that work? Fewer sales, but more money overall.
It works because the sales that are happening are increasingly concentrated in the high-end luxury segments of the market. The data from Anorak Property Consultants illustrates this perfectly.
Gives us the numbers.
In Q3 2025, the overall sales volume in the top 7 Indian cities actually fell by 9% compared to the same quarter in 2024. Fewer apartments were sold. However, the total sales value generated from those fewer sales rose by a striking 14%.
Fell 9% in volume, rose 14% in value.
Exactly. The total value jumped from 1.33 lakh crore in Q3 2024 to 1.52 lakh crore in Q3 2025. This jump was driven almost entirely by high-volume sales in the luxury, priced above 1.5 crore, and ultra-luxury, often above 3-4 crore segments.
So the average price per transaction is going way up. Where is this concentration of luxury supply most acute? Which cities are seeing this most dramatically?
It appears to be highly concentrated in the major tech hubs and the national capital region. For example, in that same Q3 2025, a full 70% of all the new apartment supply launched in Delhi was categorized as luxury, meaning priced between 1.5 crore and 3 crore.
70% luxury in Delhi. Wow.
And in Hyderabad, it was even more skewed towards the high end. An astounding 87% of all new supply launched in Hyderabad during that quarter was classified as either premium, luxury, or ultra-luxury. That means units priced generally over 1.5 crore and often significantly higher, like over 3 crore.
87% in Hyderabad. That's incredible. It really confirms that the developer's sweet spot, the price point where they feel they can make the most sales and profit, has fundamentally shifted upwards.
It absolutely has. It's moved decisively out of reach for the typical salaried middle-class buyer in major cities. Industry executives quoted in the sources confirm this explicitly. They say that the comfortable price range for apartments, the so-called sweet spot for developers, shifted from maybe the 60 lakh to the 1 crore bracket just a few years ago.
Which was already a stretch for many.
Already a stretch, yes. It's shifted from that range up to the 1 crore to 2 crore range today. Even on the outskirts of major southern cities like Chennai or Bengaluru, finding a reasonably sized, decent quality apartment for less than 1.3 or 1.4 crore is becoming increasingly difficult.
And this forces buyers, like Akanksha Agarwal we mentioned, to take on substantially larger amounts of debt if they still want to buy.
Exactly. The financial strain is increasing. PNB Housing Finance, a major lender, reported that their average home loan size has grown by 15–20% just recently, reaching about 35 lakh. People are borrowing more because prices are higher.
Okay, so demand shifted, supply followed, prices soared. Beyond those core market dynamics, we also need to consider regulatory factors and input costs. The Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, RERA, from 2016 is often cited. Has it had an impact?
Yes, RERA is considered a very important factor, generally seen as a positive one for the market's health, even if it hasn't controlled prices. It's widely credited with increasing consumer confidence.
How so?
Mainly through man-mapping project registration, requiring greater transparency from developers about project timelines and finances, and, crucially, restricting developers from diverting funds collected for one specific project to fund their other ventures.
Ring-fencing project funds.
Yes. This regulatory certainty and improved transparency also had another effect. It increased the confidence of institutional financiers, banks, NBFCs, private equity funds. They became more willing to provide funding for real estate projects, especially larger ones, knowing there were better governance structures in place. This influx of institutional capital also likely contributed to the ability of developers to launch these larger, more expensive projects we're seeing dominate the market now.
Right. And finally, just briefly on the cost side for developers, were there any changes regarding input costs, like construction materials, any relief there?
On the input cost side, there was one significant positive development mentioned. The Goods and Services Tax, GST, rate on cement, which is obviously a vital construction material, was brought down.
And from what to what?
It was reduced from the highest slab of 28% down to 18%. This reduction happened in September 2025.
So that should help lower construction costs.
It should, yes. It reduces a major input cost for developers. However, given the long gestation period of most real estate projects, it takes years from planning to completion. The benefit of this tax cut might take a considerable amount of time to actually trickle down and be fully reflected in the final prices paid by consumers. It's not an immediate fix for affordability.
Okay. So we've moved from the strain on household finances and physical infrastructure like housing to looking at simultaneous strains on our technological and even defense infrastructure. Let's turn our attention now skywards to a major concern that emerged over the skies of the national capital itself. Reports of severe GPS spoofing incidents impacting Delhi airspace. This sounds highly unusual and potentially dangerous for a major metropolitan airport like Delhi's.
It is extremely alarming, yes. The reports detailed severe GPS spoofing occurring within a 60 nautical mile radius of Delhi's airspace over the preceding week. And this isn't just minor interference, it's a specific type of cyber attack with potentially serious operational impacts.
Can you explain what severe GPS spoofing actually means for a pilot sitting in the cockpit? What are they experiencing?
It means their aircraft's navigation systems are receiving deliberately false GPS signals. This can manifest in several dangerous ways. showing incorrect navigation data on their displays, indicating an incorrect aircraft position, sometimes miles off, and, critically, triggering misleading terrain warnings.
False terrain warnings, even during takeoff or landing.
Yes, potentially even during the most sensitive phases of flight, like approach and takeoff. This immediately forces pilots to disregard the compromised GPS data, declare an issue, and rely entirely on backup systems and instructions from air traffic control. It demands immediate manual intervention.
And how widespread was this disruption? Was it just isolated incidents, or were multiple flights affected?
The reports suggest it was quite widespread during that period. One pilot flying for a major airline was quoted saying they encountered GPS spoofing on all 6 days they operated flights in and out of Delhi that week.
All 6 days.
That's what was reported. And air traffic control sources also confirmed that these disruptions were frequent enough to require significant manual intervention from their end. Controllers had to actively provide direct, radar-based navigation guidance to affected aircraft, basically talking them through maneuvers, which inevitably contributed to flight delays at what is already one of India's busiest airports.
Now, we know GPS interference sometimes happens along sensitive border areas. Is the fact that this was happening intensely over Delhi the main cause for concern here?
Exactly. GPS spoofing, to be clear, is a deliberate cyber attack. Someone is actively transmitting false GPS signals designed to mislead navigation systems. While interference, sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate jamming, is unfortunately somewhat common for pilots flying near the India-Pakistan border. The sources mention 465 incidents of GPS interference and spoofing reported just in the Amritsar and Jammu flight information regions between November 2023 and February 2025.
465 incidents near the border.
Yes. So, pilots are trained to anticipate issues there. But having sustained severe spoofing incidents occurring directly over the capital's core airspace, affecting a major international airport, is rare. It suggests potentially a higher level of threat sophistication or a different actor involved. And both the major international aviation bodies, IATA and ICAO, have issued warnings recently stating that these kinds of disruptions represent a significant and growing threat to global aviation safety.
It's scary to think about planes relying so heavily on this tech. Given that reliance, how are aircraft safety protocols designed to mitigate this specific risk of GPS spoofing? What are the backups?
Fortunately, modern commercial aircraft are designed with multiple layers of redundancy precisely for situations like this. The primary safety backup system against GPS failure or spoofing is the Inertial Reference System, or IRS.
The IRS, how does that work?
The IRS uses a combination of highly precise gyroscopes and accelerometers located physically within the aircraft. These instruments constantly track the aircraft's movement, its acceleration, changes in direction, rotation entirely independently of any external signals like GPS.
So it navigates based on its own motion.
Essentially, yes. It calculates the aircraft's position by dead reckoning from its last known accurate position. If the primary GPS system fails or is clearly compromised by spoofing, pilots can rely on the IRS. And the IRS is designed to maintain safe and accurate navigation for a considerable period, often up to 5 hours, even with the complete loss of GPS. This gives pilots ample time to troubleshoot, switch to alternative ground-based navigation aids if available, or simply proceed safely to their destination or a diversion airport.
Okay, that's reassuring. Redundancy is key. Now, moving from cybersecurity threats to, well, potentially existential ones, nuclear security. Let's address the recent statements from U.S. President Donald Trump threatening to potentially upend the long-standing global nuclear test moratorium.
Yes. Trump's recent statement caused a major geopolitical tremor. He claimed, quite forcefully, that the U.S. would start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis with other nations. His rationale, as stated, was his belief that other nuclear powers, specifically naming Russia, China, North Korea, and Pakistan, are currently conducting nuclear tests.
Okay, that's a strong claim. Let's clarify the actual facts here regarding the current status of the global moratorium and the testing history of major powers. Is his premise correct?
The facts are crucial here, and his premise appears largely incorrect regarding the major powers he cited, besides North Korea. The United States last conducted a full-scale nuclear test way back in 1992.
1992, okay.
China conducted its last nuclear test in 1996. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, which aimed to ban all nuclear explosions everywhere, was open for signature in 1996.
But not everyone ratified it, right?
Correct. Both the U.S. and China signed the CTBT, signaling intent. But critically, neither country ever ratified the treaty. This means they are not legally bound by it under international law. However, both nations have voluntarily adhered to a moratorium on testing since the mid-90s.
What about Russia?
Russia's situation is different. Russia had signed and ratified the CTBT. But in 2023, amidst escalating tensions with the U.S., particularly over Ukraine, Russia announced its decision to de-ratify the treaty. They haven't resumed testing yet, but they've legally untied their hands, so to speak.
So North Korea is the outlier that has tested this century.
Yes, North Korea has conducted multiple nuclear tests in the 21st century, in defiance of international norms and UN sanctions. But the other major established nuclear powers, U.S., Russia, China, UK, France, have maintained a testing pause for over 2 decades. Pakistan last tested in 1998, alongside India.
Okay. And what's the current global nuclear inventory look like? Who has the most warheads?
According to the latest estimates, Russia remains the largest nuclear power in terms of total inventory, possessing around 4,309 nuclear warheads. The United States follows closely with approximately 3,700 warheads. China's arsenal is considerably smaller but growing. The potential restart of testing by either the U.S. or Russia would almost certainly trigger a new, dangerous, and very costly arms race.
What is the specific risk of a domino effect if the U.S. were to actually resume nuclear testing?
The risk is extremely high and potentially irreversible once started. Russia's Security Council chief, Sergei Shoigu, has already stated publicly that if the U.S. resumes testing, Russia would naturally be forced to follow suit immediately. They feel they couldn't afford not to.
And China.
There are also reports, based on satellite imagery analysis, suggesting that China has already made preparations at its former nuclear test site, Lop Nur. These preparations could allow them to resume testing relatively quickly if they perceive to need to, perhaps triggered by U.S. testing.
So U.S. tests, then Russia tests, maybe China tests. What about others?
That's the domino effect. If the 3 largest nuclear powers resume testing, the pressure on other nuclear-armed states, including India, would become immense. Facing regional rivals like China and Pakistan, who might also feel compelled to test, India would face enormous internal strategic pressure to conduct further tests of its own, to validate new warhead designs or demonstrate capability. This could quickly escalate the nuclear arms race exponentially across Asia and globally.
A very dangerous path. Okay, finally, in this section, let's look at a potentially positive infrastructural and environmental shift. India's planned move towards promoting sustainable aviation fuel, or SF.
Yes, this is a significant development for decarbonizing a hard-to-abate sector like aviation. The Union Civil Aviation Minister, Ram Mohan Naidu, recently announced that India will soon release a comprehensive national policy focused specifically on sustainable aviation fuel.
And SF is essentially jet fuel derived from non-fossil sources.
Exactly. It can be made from various feedstocks, including used cooking oil, municipal solid waste, agricultural residues, or purpose-grown energy crops. The key is it's not derived from crude oil. And India, the announcement stressed, is uniquely positioned to become a leader in this space.
What are the specific metrics or facts that illustrate India's unique advantage here? Why is India so well positioned?
The primary advantage lies in India's status as a massive agricultural powerhouse. The country possesses a colossal renewable resource base. Estimates suggest over 750 million tons of available biomass annually. And critically, within that, there's a surplus of about 213 million tons of agricultural residue, things like straw, husks, stalks that currently often goes unutilized or is burned, causing air pollution.
213 million tons of surplus residue.
Yes, this vast pool of feedstock could potentially be converted into SAF using various technologies. This domestic feedstock capacity positions India to potentially become a global leader in producing a SAF, possibly at a lower cost than countries that rely more heavily on imports or different feedstocks.
So the potential is huge. What are India's specific mandated blending targets for SAF in the near term? And does the country currently have the capacity to meet them?
Okay, first the global context. The current global need for SAF is estimated at around 2 million tons annually, but this is projected to rise dramatically, perhaps to 183 million tons by 2040 as aviation grows and decarbonization pressures increase.
Right. And India's targets.
India's initial domestic targets, as announced, are set at achieving a 1% blend of SAF in all jet fuel used in the country by 2027. This would require approximately 30 million liters of SAF annually. The target then increases to 2% blending by 2028, which would require about 62 million liters per year.
1% by 2027, 2% by 2028. Is that achievable? Does India have the production capacity right now?
Crucially, yes, it seems achievable. The report mentions that local oil marketing companies and potentially new entrants already have a combined annual production capacity for SAF estimated at around 70 million liters.
70 million liters capacity already.
Yes. So India appears well on course to comfortably meet and potentially even exceed its initial domestic blending targets for 2027 and 2028 using existing or near-term capacity. The challenge will be scaling up dramatically beyond that to meet higher future blending mandates.
All right, we're coming into the home stretch of our deep dive. We're wrapping up by focusing on justice and some critical social issues. And we have to start with a really complex one. The intersection of rapidly advancing artificial intelligence, AI, technology, and mental health support. The data on usage is just overwhelming, but the ethical and clinical questions are incredibly complicated.
They really are. And that usage statistic reported by OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, is genuinely startling. They stated that over 1 million people discuss suicide or self-harm tendencies with ChatGPT every single week.
1 million people a week turning to an AI for that kind of crisis discussion.
It indicates that AI chatbots, whether by design or default, are already functioning as a primary outlet, maybe even a first responder, for a huge number of people, particularly students it seems, who are struggling with severe mental distress. The huge debate then is whether this is ultimately a net positive, a harm reduction tool, or if it poses significant clinical dangers.
Proponents, like Neeraj Kumar from the mental health tech company PeakMind, argue that AI's big advantage is lowering the barrier to entry. It makes it easier for people to take that first step towards seeking help.
Yes, Kumar's position is quite pragmatic. He argues that AI is extremely useful in mitigating the stigma often associated with mental health issues. People might feel more comfortable typing to a bot than immediately talking to a human. He also suggests AI makes mental health more measurable.
How so measurable?
His company's app, Piku, which he notes is specifically trained using data reflecting the Indian cultural context, uses validated psychological screening assessments to track user distress levels over time. It can then offer tailored cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT-based tools, things like guided journaling exercises, mindfulness practices, mood tracking.
So automated self-help tools based on established therapy techniques.
Exactly. And crucially, he emphasizes that these tools incorporate safety guardrails. The system is designed to raise critical alerts to human supervisors or emergency contacts if a user expresses clear intent for self-harm. He even claimed their system has directly intervened and, in his words, saved over 100 suicidal cases by triggering timely human intervention.
So the argument is that for students or anyone who finds the idea of immediately walking into a counselor's office too overwhelming or stigmatizing, AI can serve as a necessary initial bridge, a transition tool.
That's the core argument for its utility, yes. A first, accessible, non-judgmental step. However, the clinical community, represented in our sources by Dr. Jamila Koshi, a practicing psychiatrist, expresses very deep reservations about relying on a machine for this kind of support.
What are her main concerns? She argues AI fundamentally undermines the purpose of real therapy.
Yes, Dr. Koshi's concern stems from the inherent limitations of the technology itself, as she sees it. She argues that AI, no matter how sophisticated, is fundamentally a mechanical tool. It operates based on algorithms and pattern recognition. It might be good at recognizing specific keywords or phrases, combinations like death wish or wanting to die or feeling hopeless.
But it misses things.
It completely misses, she argues, the vital nonverbal and contextual clues that a human therapist relies on heavily to make a real assessment. Things like a person's tone of voice, their body language, signs of social withdrawal, changes in appearance or hygiene, the subtle emotional shifts that indicate deepening depression or distress. AI can't perceive those.
So it's only processing the explicit text, not the implicit human context.
Precisely. She finds the idea of calling a bot a companion or a substitute for therapy therapeutically harmful, and her clinical standard is quite clear. If a person feels the need to talk to a mental health bot more than, say, 3 times, they have likely gone past the point of needing simple initial mitigation. They need proper human therapeutic intervention from a trained professional.
This raises a really profound ethical point, doesn't it, about what using these AI tools teaches young people, especially students, about human interaction and resilience.
That is perhaps the core ethical debate highlighted. Dr. Koshi pointed out a key difference. AI, particularly chatbots like ChatGPT, is invariably programmed to be supportive, non-judgmental, and to always validate the user's feelings and statements.
Which sounds good on the surface.
It sounds positive, yes. But her concern is that this constant, unconditional technological validation fails to prepare students for the complexities and difficulties of the real world. The real world inevitably involved navigating disagreement, rejection, conflict, dealing with imperfect and sometimes difficult human interactions. She worries that relying on AI that always agrees and validates doesn't build the necessary emotional resilience required to cope with life's actual challenges.
A fascinating and slightly troubling debate. Okay, moving from AI ethics into core jurisprudence now. The Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling recently, significantly strengthening the rights of arrested persons, specifically regarding being informed about the grounds of their arrest.
Yes, this ruling is a major reinforcement of the constitutional protections under Article 22, which guarantees personal liberty and provides safeguards against arbitrary arrest and detention.
What exactly did the SC hold?
The Supreme Court held that any person arrested must be furnished with the grounds for their arrest in writing, not just told verbally. And crucially, this written information must be provided in a language that the arrested person fully understands.
In writing, in a language they understand. Does this apply to all offenses?
Yes. The court clarified that this requirement applies universally, regardless of the nature of the offense, whether it's a minor infraction or a serious crime, and regardless of the specific statute under which the arrest is made. It's a fundamental procedural safeguard.
And did the court impose a specific procedural deadline to make sure this right is actually enforceable in practice?
Yes, they did establish a strict procedural requirement. The written grounds of arrest must be supplied to the arrestee within a reasonable time frame, and the court specified, in any case, no later than 2 hours prior to that person being produced before the magistrate for their first remand hearing.
2 hours before the remand hearing, that time window seems critical. Why?
It's critical because it gives the arrested person, and potentially their lawyer if they have one by then, a meaningful opportunity to understand why they are being detained before the magistrate decides whether to authorize continued detention, remand. It allows them to challenge the legality of the arrest or the grounds presented.
And what happens if the police or arresting agency fails to comply with this, if they don't provide the grounds in writing or not in time?
The Supreme Court's ruling was unequivocal on the consequences. Non-compliance with this requirement, failure to furnish the grounds of arrest in writing, in a language understood by the arrestee, within the stipulated time frame renders the arrest itself and any subsequent remand order based on that arrest illegal.
Illegal, meaning?
Meaning the person must be set free. It's a powerful remedy. This ruling gives a massive functional power back to the citizen, ensuring that the state cannot arbitrarily detain individuals without clearly, comprehensively, and promptly informing them of the exact reasons for curtailing their liberty.
A very significant procedural protection. Now, the Supreme Court is also currently examining another highly sensitive issue, this one touching on reproductive autonomy and family law. A restriction under the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, specifically related to secondary infertility.
Yes, this involves a petition challenging a specific clause, Section 4 of the Surrogacy Act. This section imposes a very sharp and some argue discriminatory distinction.
What's the distinction?
It effectively bans married couples from using surrogacy to have a second child if they already have a surviving child, whether that child is biological, adopted, or was previously conceived via surrogacy. There's an exception, but it's very narrow.
And what's the exception?
The ban doesn't apply only if the existing child suffers from a diagnosed life-threatening disorder or is severely physically or mentally challenged.
So unless your existing child has a severe condition, you cannot use surrogacy for another child, even if you're now medically unable to conceive.
That's the effect of the law as it stands. The law essentially makes a judgment, critics argue, on whether a couple's infertility is considered worthy of accessing surrogacy based on the health status or mere existence of their current family.
And petitioners argue this is discriminatory.
Precisely. They argue that this restriction, specifically targeting married couples who face secondary infertility, meaning they were able to conceive naturally before but are now medically unable to have another child, is a direct violation of their fundamental right to make reproductive choices and plan their family.
What was the original intent of the Surrogacy Act?
The overall intent of the 2021 Act was certainly laudable in many respects. It aimed primarily to prevent the commercialization of surrogacy, protect surrogate mothers from exploitation, and regulate assisted reproductive technologies ethically.
But this specific clause seems arbitrary to the petitioners.
Yes. The petitioners argued that restricting access to surrogacy based purely on whether a couple's infertility is primary, never conceived, or secondary, conceived before it but can't now, appears arbitrary and excessively intrusive into private family decisions. It forces the Supreme Court, once again, to weigh the state's legitimate interest in regulation against the individual's fundamental autonomy, this time in the profoundly personal realm of reproductive choice.
Okay. Finally, let's end our review of domestic policy and social issues with a notably progressive move by the Karnataka state government regarding menstrual leave.
Yes, this is quite significant. Karnataka has become the first state in India to approve 1 day of paid menstrual leave per month for women employees. That totals 12 days per year.
Paid leave. And who does it apply to?
Crucially, the policy applies to all women employees, working in both the government sector and the private sector across the state.
Government and private. That broad inclusion seems key. How does it compare to other states that have similar policies?
It goes significantly further. States like Odisha and Bihar also have provisions for menstrual leave, but those are generally limited only to women working in government jobs. Kerala has implemented it within universities. Karnataka extending it mandatorily to the private sector as well is a first for the country.
What's the underlying medical or social justification put forward for mandating this specific type of leave?
Proponents frame it primarily as a critical health and workplace equity issue. They cite medical research, including studies noting that the pain from severe menstrual cramps, known as dysmenorrhea, is sometimes described by patients as being almost as bad as having a heart attack.
That's intense pain.
Yes, and the policy aims to explicitly acknowledge that debilitating conditions like endometriosis or uterine fibroids can cause severe pain that genuinely prevents women from working effectively on certain days. The paid leave provides necessary rest without forcing women to deplete their limited general sick leave for a recurring, predictable physiological reason. It's a formal recognition of menstrual health as an integral part of overall employee health and well-being.
Makes sense from a health perspective. That said, there is predictably significant debate about the potential practical implications and maybe unintended consequences of mandating this leave, especially forcing it on the private sector.
Yes, there's a strong note of caution raised, even by some who support the principle. The concern is that while the policy is symbolically important and supportive for women's health, its mandatory nature, particularly the 12 days per year aspect, could inadvertently reinforce workplace bias against women.
How might that bias manifest?
The fear is that employers, especially in competitive or deadline-driven sectors, might consciously or subconsciously factor in the possibility of women employees taking up to 12 additional days of mandatory leave annually, beyond regular sick leave or vacation. This might lead them to hesitate in assigning women critical projects, client-facing roles, or leadership responsibilities that require consistent presence. It could potentially deepen gender inequity in career progression and work assignments.
A potential backlash effect.
That's the concern. Clinicians also add another perspective. While leave is helpful for managing acute symptoms, women experiencing severe, debilitating menstrual pain consistently should be encouraged to seek medical help to diagnose and treat the underlying cause, like endometriosis or fibroids, rather than relying solely on temporary leave as the only solution month after month.
So, a multifaceted issue, important policy, but with potential complexities in implementation. And finally, just a brief but critical look at an international social crisis, driven directly by political decisions, the tragic situation regarding maternal mortality in Afghanistan.
Yes, the sources included a stark reminder of how political decisions can have devastating direct consequences on public health, particularly for women. The maternal death rate in Afghanistan is reported to be soaring.
And this is linked to specific policies.
Directly linked, according to aid agencies and reports, to the Taliban regime's political decisions. Banning girls from education beyond the 6th grade, which halts the pipeline of future female health workers, shuttering essential nursing and midwifery training schools, and imposing severe restrictions on the movement and ability of existing female health workers to actually practice.
And there's a cultural factor compounding this.
Yes. Strict cultural norms in many parts of Afghanistan restrict women from being treated by male doctors.
So if you ban girls' education, close midwifery schools, restrict female doctors, and women can't see male doctors,
you create a catastrophic, fatal shortage of skilled female healthcare providers, especially for maternal and child health. The lack of access to trained birth attendants and emergency obstetric care means a surge in dangerous, unsupervised home births and preventable deaths during childbirth.
a preventable tragedy driven by policy. Is there an economic cost quantified?
Yes. Beyond the immense human cost, UNICEF data quantified just one aspect of the economic impact. The prohibition on secondary education for girls alone was estimated to have cost the Afghan economy at least $500 million in lost potential just in 2022. It's a humanitarian disaster compounded by severe, self-inflicted financial loss for the country. #TagAlcherman.
Wow. What an immense and incredibly varied deep dive today. We really covered the spectrum. We started with that foundational legal distinction, didn't we, between the statutory right to vote and the constitutional freedom of expression in the voting booth.
We did. And then we moved through the massive technological overhaul,
Yeah.
coming with the digital census, the harsh financial realities laid bare by that wealth gap data, the top 1% owning 40% of national wealth. That's stark.
Stark indeed.
Yeah.
And we trace those economic threads right through to the housing market crisis, where prices in a place like Delhi NCR jumped 122%, while real wages actually fell slightly. That disconnect.
And we ended up navigating right into the most personal realms of individual autonomy and state power. The fundamental legal right to be given written grounds for your arrest, the ongoing debates around reproductive choice and surrogacy laws, and even the complexities of mandatory menstrual leave policy.
So when you pull back and look at all these disparate pieces, electoral roll revisions, housing data, AI chatbots, nuclear testing threats, surrogacy laws, what's the common thread? What does this all synthesize into? We've seen tension across pretty much every segment of governance we discussed.
I think the ultimate synthesis, the thread running through almost everything we discussed today, lies in that central recurring conflict. The inherent tension between state regulation and individual autonomy in the complex world of the 21st century.
State power versus personal freedom.
Exactly. Whether it's the state imposing perhaps overly strict technical limits on who can even run for office through those nomination traps, or the Supreme Court challenging the state's right to restrict deeply personal reproductive choices in surrogacy, or society grappling with the ethical lines around AI's role in guiding our mental health. The critical underlying question seems to be, how does the state effectively balance its essential, legitimate duty to regulate complex systems, protect citizens from harm and exploitation, and ensure overall stability?
Right.
How does it balance that duty against the individual's expanding assertion of freedom of expression, personal choice, and bodily autonomy in a technologically saturated and rapidly modernizing world? Finding that balance seems to be the core challenge.
That tension regulating complexity without unduly stifling individual freedom and choice, that is the fundamental challenge running through every single policy area you just walked us through. It's a huge takeaway. Thank you for navigating us through this incredibly comprehensive deep dive into all the sources you shared with us.
It was my pleasure to unpack all that detail for you. There was certainly a lot there.
There really was. We sincerely hope this provided you, our listener, with every critical fact, data point, and insight you needed from this material. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.